Okay, good to see you all. Please remember that quiz number 5 will be up tomorrow, 6 p.m. Just remember our last quiz. Yeah. And you have a week to do it, but there will, remember, and this is in the syllabus, there will be no extensions because remember, like, we end next week. Next Thursday is our last class, May 2nd. And when the quiz, you have the week and the week ends on that Friday. Like in a few days, you have the final exams. I think they begin on that Tuesday. So there's no, it's just too pressed up too close together to give an extension. So please get the quiz done as soon as possible, especially if there are any problems, so you can restart it if I need to restart it for somebody. Hopefully there'll be no problems. But just remember that. And I guess that's all I wanted to say. Oh, if you haven't watched the lecture from Tuesday, it's up on YouTube, so take a look at that. Because questions will arise and cease. Buddhism. Questions will arise on the quiz on Friday from what I talked about on Tuesday. So just take a look at it, please, so you know you can give the answers. Okie dokie. And they'll certainly show up again on the final exam. So, all right, what's going on here? This is a bunch of Buddhist monks at their monastery. I forget the exact name of this day, but it's a holiday. I think it's once a year in Buddhism, where there's a more intense following of the Buddhist way of life. And so the monks will gather, especially in their monasteries. Lay people will show up. They'll go to a monastery to kind of maybe spend the day with the monks to kind of intensify their practice of Buddhism. And part of the whole practice is a recitation of the rule. There's a rather longish rule for both men and female monks that's in the Buddhist scriptures, the Buddhist sacred writings, and so they take a period of time and they recite the whole rule. I think it's in Pali, and that's what this guy is doing here. He's reciting the rule they're supposed to live by to remind the monks. And this must be during COVID because they're all, I'm assuming, because they're like all in masks. Almost all of them are in masks, except for the guy doing the recitation. This dude's gotten a little bit lazy with his mask, So you're little masked Nazis come by. It's like, you please put your mask over your nose, Even though I guess I don't know how effective they were, who knows? But anyways, we did it anyway. So they all got their masks on, which I find is rather interesting because in Buddhism, remember, with the Buddha, suffering is just part of human existence. It's, because he sees the sick man during his 4 encounters, and the guy tells him, the servant tells him, this is the way of life. People get sick, people are healthy, but sometimes they're sick. It's part of the transience of the human condition. There's nothing good or bad about it. It's for the Buddha, it's part of his realization of the impermanence of reality. And so everything is kind of empty of foundation. It's not really permanent. So whether you're sick or you're healthy, doesn't in a way matter, really, ultimately. Yet they're all wearing masks. I guess I don't want to make the monk next to them sick. So I wonder if that's an inconsistency. But I'd have to ask one of them, what's the consistency in that? Because it doesn't matter. But then someone might respond that they're showing compassion because they don't want to make someone else sick if they don't have to be sick. It's not necessary to make people sick. But anyways, so that's what's going on here. It's kind of soothing. Okay, so let's get back to it. Where did I end on Tuesday? Talked about the Noble Eightfold Path. Now I'm on to this PowerPoint slide. Let's see what we got here. On Atman. On Atman is Purnell, one of the main doctrines of the Buddha. Okay, we remember our old friend Atman from Hinduism. Does anyone remember what an Atman is in Hinduism? What is the Atman? The Atman. No, it's not a Rastafarian greeting. But Mr. Holstein.
Permanent individual self.
Yes, sir. Excellent. It's the self. Traditionally in English, it was translated as soul. Soul's probably not the best way to translate it. More the self, the personality that we have, this permanent existence that is us and makes us us. And then the jiva is what relates us to the world of illusion. But, if everything is impermanent in reality, if everything is in flux and nothing is really substantial, nothing really stands on anything else because everything is constantly changing, then that applies to the soul or the Atman or the self as well. The Atman is not really a permanent thing. And so this led the Buddha to really deny that there is actually an Atman that we perceive within ourselves. So this is an essential plank of Hindu belief that he's denying here. So taking another step away from his Hindu roots. And this belief that the Atman does not really exist, and at least not as a permanent reality, that it's really an illusion, is called An-Atman, the no-self idea. Okay. And for the Buddha, the belief in the Atman is really humanity's fatal flaw. Okay? We believe that there is a permanent, unchanging individual self. There is an Atman, and that's a problem. For Hindus, remember, Hindus believe in Maya. Hinduism accepts this idea that the world is illusion. Maya means illusion. That the world, which is another way of saying the world is impermanent and changeable, okay? Just like sickness and health, and you come out as a baby, but you grow and change. You're never the same. You get older. The world is constantly changing. The universe is constantly changing around us. Most things do not seem permanent, I should say. And so the Hinduism recognized that there were changeable and impermanent qualities to the real world, in our bodies, in our minds, in the physical world. But that these changeable qualities were attached to something, the Atman, the self. There was one thing that was real. And that was how they explained reincarnation. What was coming back through the endless cycle of death and rebirth was the Atman. Okay, the cycle is constantly changing and changing and changing and moving along. But there was one thing that was permanent that was moving through it, and that was your Atman. Your Atman. So you were still the same person in a way, still the same self, even though you had multiple existences. And of course, the idea of moksha was to liberate the Atman from the endless cycle. So it would go somewhere else. It would be united with Brahman. So the Atman for Hinduism gave the person a sense of self, that there was an ego, there was an I that existed, an I that was in existence. But the Buddha taught that was all fantasy. That's what An-Atman is about, that this is all fantasy. This is an illusion as well. Nothing is unchangeable. Nothing could be unchangeable. For the Buddha, everything, all things arise into being and cease to exist. They come into existence and go out of existence. Everything. And this applies logically for him, it applied to the Atman as well. Nothing in the universe lied outside of this process. So if there's no real foundational reality, all we have is the Maya then. All we have is the illusion, the appearance. All things are appearance only. There's no underlying reality for the Buddha. This ties into the idea of emptiness, that things are empty. They're devoid of true permanent existence. So the human being is an aggregate of things that come together and give the impression of an identity and persistence through time. And if you think about this really kind of is the genius of the Buddha. Because he kind of came at this just through thinking about it. Hello, Ms. Moses. He just came about, that's all right. No need to rush.
Oh, it's your time.
That's okay. The Buddha, Gautama Siddhartha, was not a geneticist. He didn't know about the human genome, or how the human being was made up. Okay, but he came at this idea through thinking about it. If you think about what we know now about the human body and have started to uncover, I mean, there is some truth into what he's saying. If you think about yourself, you are a combination of other bits and parts from other combinations of bits and parts. Your DNA, when you were conceived, your father contributed some DNA, your mother contributed another part of the DNA. They bound themselves together and started forming this human. But their DNA was also combinated or came together from their father and their mother, and on and on and on, and back and back and back in the line in your lineage. And it could go back as far as you want to our first ancestors, and go back as when we came out of the slime, whatever. But anyways, I think you get the idea. So where the question he's asking, you could still ask today philosophically, where is your identity then? Where are you? Because you're a combination of a combination of a combination of things, and combination of going on and on and on through your ancestors that have all come together in a unique way into what you say is a you. But is there really a you that's there? Or is it just a combination of the genes that you've received from all the other previous people who were there before you? And then, there's the question of, what do genes do for us? I mean, do they really make us into a person, or are we just a determined robot in a way? We have no free will because our genes are already patterned and programmed to do what they're going to do. So do we really make the decisions? Is there really a you, a personal you making decisions? Or is it just genes flipping on, flipping off, and leading you to do what you did? That's a question. And this is a question, and people who are biologists talk about this, and philosophers talk about this, and religions. And Buddha was already all over this, apparently, way back when, like in maybe the 6th century BC, just by thinking about it. That just thinking about the logic of it. That we come from our parents, and our parents came from their parents, and their parents, and each is contributing a little part. However it can. Even though his biology is probably not correct, who knows, they're contributing some little parts here and there, and you're just a conglomeration of parts. So where's the identity? Where can you find an Atman that makes it an identity and a unified thing? I mean, it can be true. I mean, he couldn't deny, of course, that there is something that says you're a you. There is something there that still presents itself like identity, like this is me, Matthew Dunn, okay, there is something here, there's a thinking subject apparently, something that's making choices and moving around, coming to class, coming to work, driving the car, getting up in the morning. But for the Buddha, while there is momentarily, this is the thing, this is the catch, that it's momentary. It's not eternal for the Buddha. There will not always be a you. There was not always a you. So, I mean, if you think about, like, how do you think the world was 100 years ago when you weren't here? The world was still going on. People were doing their lives and living there, and no one was thinking about you. No one was making plans based on your existence later on. And eventually it will not be a you. You'll be like, as I remember one atheist described it, like it's turning off the radio. Just kind of a, not maybe the best term because people don't really have radios anymore in their homes. But, it's like turning off your cell phone, I guess. Which again is maybe not such a not a good metaphor because people never turn their cell phone. But anyways, all right. Like flipping off a light switch. Maybe that's a better thing. You flip off eventually your light switch will be flipped off. And it's just like there's no more light coming from the light bulb. You're not there anymore. It's momentary. So while there's momentarily a person who could rightly be identified as an I, an Atman, there's no Atman, there's no self that you always are, even in your existence, because there was not a you at one point, and there will be a not you at some point in the future. Hopefully for you will be a long future, God willing. And in between, there's still you're full of change. You're still you're a baby. Babies are very different. I mean, your bones and your organs are still developing even when you're outside the womb. Your brains do not come to full development until you're around 25. And then once you get to your 30s, at a certain point, your body starts to do the reverse process where things start to degrade. Your muscles start to atrophy. Your brain as well. Your brain becomes less efficient. So, you're not even always, when you are a person, that's even momentary, because from year to year, from moment to moment, you're not the same person. So there's he made the logical leap, I guess you could say, or conclusion that this was therefore made the Atman an illusion. Anitya, well, I'll get to dependent arising in a second. It's out of order on my paper here, but anitya is the Buddhist term for the impermanent nature of reality. Again, anitya means not permanent. That's all it means. It's the negation of permanence. So this is what I've been talking about. So sometimes you'll come across this terminology. So I give it to you of anitya, this permanent. And it kind of is like Maya in Hinduism. Things are illusory. The idea that I've been kind of describing to you is called dependent arising, that things come into existence, like you come into existence, you exist, and then you go out of existence. And this seems to be the law of the universe, or seemed to be the law of the universe for the Buddha. And so he described this, and scholars call it dependent arising, that everything in the universe depends on something else. It's contingent. It's another philosophical term that we would use in the West. Everything's kind of touching on each other. Contingent comes from the Latin word tango. Tango tangere tetegi tactum. Means touching. So everything is kind of touching on everything else, okay? Which is kind of a metaphorical way of talking about how things do not exist on their own. I mentioned that you don't exist on your own. You came from your parents, and your parents came from their parents. And ultimately, we came from stars, from the elements that created the stars. And those elements ultimately came from what scientists call the Big Bang, the emergence of the universe, all the way back to that. And who knows before that where stuff comes from. Well, some religions know. Wink, wink. Anyways. But, that seems to be the way of the universe, not just humanity, but the physical universe, that things arise out of other things, have their cause in other things, go out of their own existence. They don't necessarily exist forever. They cease to be and go into nothingness. And this idea of dependent arising is the fundamental assumption of all forms of Buddhism. They all agree on this point, that things come into existence and go out of existence. They cease to be. I'll skip over that. So reality, including the Atman, including the self, is an impermanent, constantly changing arrangement of the world's elements, or dharmas. So you see, again, the multivalence of this word dharma. The dharmas that make up the world are constantly changing. And every part of the universe is subject to this impermanence, to change and decay. And every created thing perishes eventually. All right. Related to this idea, not just the changeableness of the universe, is the fact that the universe is composed, that things are made up of other things. The universe and everything in it is made out of parts of many individual elements, which themselves also they're in a state of flux, always dissolving, combining in new ways, but they're also in composition. All right. So another way of saying that is like, our bodies are machines, and you just like, any machine, when there's no more gas in the tank, or, there's no electricity in the battery, those charged to the battery, the machine stops working. Okay. And Buddhism kind of treats the body in this way. So in some of the religious practices, for example, death rituals, But I think this is mainly practiced in Tibetan Buddhism. They have this practice of taking the dead body, the corpse, and they'll strip it and it'll be nude, and they'll lay it out on the ground, and they'll cut it up into pieces, different body pieces, body parts. I'm losing people. They cut it up into different body parts, and then they kind of leave it there for the carrion eaters, for birds or whatever other animals to feast on it and eat it, And this is meant to show symbolically how the body is just a conglomeration of parts. It's just like the whole universe. It's just made out of parts. There's no unity to it. Once you cut it up, it's not even really a human anymore. That's trying to show that symbolically. That there is now other religions, like Christianity or something, would say that's true. The body does become when it becomes a corpse, it is just a conglomeration of parts, but that's because the soul is missing. And also Hinduism, I think, might say this. The soul is missing, that there's the self is missing, which is what makes the body, which is physically a machine, operative. But in Buddhism, because there is nothing there that's making the body operative, because there's no self, this is the logical outflow of their view. Hello, Ms. Balser. Balser. Okay. So the belief in a self is rejected as empty, as having no relation to the truth. So this is what kind of like what the Buddha realized during his enlightenment under the tree. And so our individuality, or the individuality of the human being, is really just an illusion that we hold on to. We're just a flowing stream of things that come together and rearrange themselves after death to form a new individual. Basically karma, because you still have to explain, and the Buddha even himself had to explain. This is kind of like where the theory hits up against the brick wall. It's like, yeah, but I still feel like there's a self. There's still something that I can perceive thinking, that seems to be independent of all of you. It seems to be having, yes, I might be made up of the DNA of my parents, but, I don't think like my parents. I don't act, maybe in some ways I might act like my parents, but I still there's a uniqueness. So how do you explain that? And how do you explain that you go through different existences, different lives? And the Buddha had to explain that through karma, that it's your karma that you create, good or bad, which then is reorganizing, is dissolving, and then reorganizing itself from lifetime to lifetime. So if you have good karma after you're dissolved in this life, you'll come back in the next life with a better state of being, a better existence. But that's not because the Atman was good. It's because the karma was all good. And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing the illusion of karma coming together again in a new life. There's no Atman that's remaining through the cycle of rebirths. All right. So while there is a rearrangement, it's not random, okay? Karma will determine how the rearrangement will be. If your karma is bad, then you'll have a worse existence than you had before. But it's this clinging, tanha, this craving, this desire for there to be an I, an ego, an Atman, which is the cause of suffering for the Buddha. That's the ultimate cause of suffering. Not just that we want the world to be permanent, and we don't. It's a changing world. It's not permanent. But we at least want to believe that we are permanent, that we're at least the one center that we can kind of like rely on. And he's like, no, not even that. The Buddha is like, not even that. So nirvana is bound up with the an-atman idea, this nirvana, which is where you want to go to be released from this illusion. And it's the goal of Buddhist religious effort to waft away, in a sense, like smoke, the Atman, to realize that the Atman is like smoke wafting away. And nirvana, this realization, can be partially experienced before death through meditation. So obviously meditation is going to be a big part of Buddhist practice. The Buddha was not denying the existence of reality per se. When we have all this talk about emptiness or nothingness or lack of foundation, the Buddha wasn't denying that there was reality. There was you can knock on this lectern and it's real, okay? It's really there. It's resisting me. He wasn't denying that emotions, thoughts, and feelings weren't real. He wasn't saying there weren't really emotions that floated through what we consider the mind and whatever. He only was claiming that the Atman was as changeable as anything else in the universe, and hence had no ultimate foundation to it. So, what's going on? I already kind of mentioned this when I talked about samsara and what's moving through the various cycles. Would anyone like to read this? This is from the Dhammapada, the way of Dharma. Okay, Dhamma, okay, means Dharma in Pali, and Pada means a path. Actually, I think it means a foot. I think it means foot. Well, anyways, the basis of Dharma. The Dhammapada, which is kind of a short summary of Buddhist teaching, and this is a selection from it. Does anyone? Yeah, go ahead, sir. Thank you.
I have gone round in vain cycles of many lives, ever striving to find the builder of the house of life and death. But now I have seen thee, house builder, nevermore shall thou build this house. The rafters of sins are broken, the rich hole of ignorance is destroyed, the fever of craving is past, for my mortal mind is gone to the joy of the immortal nirvana.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Okay, so this gives us a little description of what nirvana is, or the connection between nirvana and between samsara. So, the Buddha was a man of his culture, so he didn't reject everything from Hinduism. He assumed that there was a cycle of death and rebirth, and he says that he has already gone around the cycles of many lives. So he assumes that he has been alive before many times, but it was all in vain. Okay. Now he's found the true knowledge. He's been trying to find the builder of the house in life and death. Okay, and that's what he says in the movie with Keanu Reeves. When Mara confronts him, and or Mara in the form of the Buddha confronts him and tries to say that I am you. I guess he's trying to represent the Atman. And Buddha says, no, I've seen you, architect. You're not going to build this house anymore. So he's describing his existence as like a house that's made out of parts. There's a roof, there are walls, but we're not going to, once we dismantle the house, there's nothing there anymore. There was nothing. It's like there was nothing there anymore. It's the same thing with the Atman. Once you dismantle the Atman, what's there? Nothing. Okay, so he realizes this. So he's not in ignorance anymore. So you won't have to rebuild the house anymore because he realizes the illusion. The fever of craving is past. So he mentions Tanhan. This is this desire for a permanent self, and now hasn't really gone to any place. He mentions the joy of the immortal nirvana. Nirvana is not so much a place; it's the removal of ignorance. It's the removal of not knowing. Okay, the ridgepole of ignorance has been destroyed. So it's not like a heaven or a paradise. It's not really nirvana is not really a place that you go to. You don't. It says it's immortal nirvana, so it's deathless nirvana. Yeah, it's not like you don't die anymore because there's nothing to die. There is no real death and birth. These are illusions. So I kind of might ask, well, what's really changed? So you just go through your existences, but you realize, I guess, the illusion that you're not really dying. You're not really being reborn. There's nothing really dying and being reborn. And that's it. So it's not really liberation from any place, like going to be united with Brahman in Hinduism or heaven with God. It's just the realizing of the truth of existence. And so you don't crave anymore the illusion of having a permanent existence. Okay? So samsara and karma. Samsara is the continuing process of reappearance. Okay, but there's nothing to reappear anymore because there really is nothing to appear anymore because there's no Atman to begin with. So you realize that. it's this chain of cause and effect. For the Buddha, the chain of cause and effect that is part and parcel of samsara is what entangles someone in the world of appearance, entanglement. You're entangled in this world of appearance, of illusion. What's the relationship to karma? Well, I already told you that karma, beings are the sum total of their karma. All right. So you have to deal with karma in Buddhism just as in Hinduism, because all beings are trapped in this cycle of death and rebirth based on their karmic actions. And it's the cluster of karmas from your previous existences that keep you in samsara and determine how you're going to be. So of course you want good karma. But actually you want the cessation of all desire. You don't want any karma at all in a way. You want nothing. You want emptiness, because even karma is emptiness. Because karma is fluid and changeable. And karma is what gives it's really karma at the root of it. Karma gives the appearance of continuity, this continuity of cause and effect, and God bless you, which brings us from existence to existence. And that's why we believe we have the appearance of a permanence or stability of an Atman. We're really misconstruing it. We're thinking there's a permanent self when really it's the actions, the karma, the consequences of the actions that keep reappearing over and over again in these different experiences, not an Atman itself. Nirvana. What is nirvana? Well, the purpose of Buddhist life is to end your attachment to impermanent reality. It's part of the Four Noble Truths. You want the second noble truth is the cessation of tanha, or craving, okay, the desire, all false desires, the false desires for things that are illusory and impermanent. Literally, the word nirvana means extinction, to extinguish. Also, it has the sense of a cooling down, or as I mentioned before, wafting away as with smoke from a candle. In Pali, you'll also see this spelling, so I'll give it to you. In Pali, it's pronounced nibbana. Similar, but different. Nibbana. I'll use the traditional term from Sanskrit, nirvana. Come to that in a moment. Did I put anything on there? I put a quotation for nirvana on there, but I think it's out of order. All right, I'll have to find it. Anywho, to reach nirvana is the goal of Buddhist life. As I said, nirvana doesn't seem to be much of a place, a location. It's more of a state of mind, I guess you could say, or a state of perception. Because nirvana is beyond, when you go beyond all conditioning and all causation, you're beyond karma, and nirvana, therefore, is beyond all mental and linguistic description. So you can't really conceive of what it is. You can't really describe what it is. It's more of an experience. You have to experience it. I guess you'll know it when you're there, is the point. You know you're in nirvana when you're in nirvana. You know you've reached your destination when you've reached your destination, if that makes any sense. So it can't be described, only experienced. And I already told you, it's not a heaven or a place. And it's just the realization. It can't be a place because there's nothing to go to that place. Because of the Anatman doctrine, there's no Atman to go anywhere or achieve any state after death. And so nirvana is really the realization of that fact. So it's a realization is another way of describing it. You've completely ceased any entanglement or attachment to anything that might keep you in desire. And that might be even your own perceiving mind, your own perceptions. Even the Buddha, you don't want to be attached to the Buddha. There's a saying in Buddhism, in some forms of Buddhism, that if you see the Buddha, you have to kill the Buddha. The story is one monk says, what would you do if you saw the Buddha walking down the road? You say, I'd kill him. I don't think he meant literally kill him, but it's a metaphorical way of saying that you don't want to even the Buddha. Reverence for the Buddha can become a source of entanglement, because even the Buddha is changeable. The Buddha is not eternal. The Buddha is impermanent. The only thing that's not apparent, it seems to be, is the Dharma. The Dharma, the realization, the only permanent thing that I can figure out in Buddhism that's truly permanent is the teaching of the Dharma, that everything is impermanent, which kind of contradicts the whole idea. But anyways, just go with it. Now compare this with Hinduism, where, Hinduism also uses the word nirvana, and has that idea, but nirvana is union with the divine absolute, with Brahman, the place of bliss. It's also beyond description, because the absolute divine is beyond description. But it's a place of bliss and consciousness and being, in existence. In Hinduism, the person is not a blown out candle, as in Buddhism, the smoke wafting away from a blown out candle. In Hinduism, they use the image of a burning candle that flickers but is undisturbed by the wind. So, you are in nirvana for Hindus, you are a burning candle, your Atman still exists, but is undisturbed by the wind, which I guess could be symbolic of illusion or whatever. But in Buddhism, notice the difference. The Buddha uses the image of, no, it's a blown out candle. There's nothing there anymore. And you realize that. Only a Buddha can realize nirvana absolutely. Okay? And there's only, we'll find out later, in the traditional view, there can only be one Buddha in an age. So Gautama Siddhartha is it. He got there first, Mr. Rosley. So it's too late for you and for all of us here. The best we can hope for is to experience nirvana in an incomplete way until the end of the life cycle, when there will be another Buddha at the end of the life cycle. But I don't know what happens. I don't know if we all become Buddhas or whatever in our own right some other time. But apparently there can only be one enlightened one at a time. And so Gautama has certainly entered into nirvana at his death, but we all have to wait. Even nirvana shares the emptiness of all things. So as I said, it's not a place. Even nirvana is empty of its own existence, of foundational existence. So even this idea of emptiness, or the dependence of everything on something else, is extended very rigorously in Buddhism to include even what you might consider the afterlife. You might say, well, at least isn't nirvana perfect, And nirvana does develop in certain forms of Buddhism. I don't think people were satisfied with this traditional view, and you will find when we talk about other forms like Mahayana forms of Buddhism, this idea does develop of kind of like a Buddhist heaven, a place of happiness and stuff, which they'll still tell you is not fully nirvana. It's not completely the idea of nirvana that the Buddhists taught, but it might be a nice way station for people, to kind of hang out in, hey, I'll stay here for a while because it's nice, on their way to nirvana. But so they have kind of, in some forms of Buddhism, kind of created a paradise, because it's not the most, invigorating view of an afterlife. It's even nirvana is impermanent and really is empty of substance. Doesn't sound like a place I'd want to go to. I don't want to sound negative about Buddhism, but I have I knew I had that quotation, but it's on a different Buddhism one. I think it might be this one. Nope. I'm gonna have to go to my. Should have overwritten it. Let me see if it's on my flash drive. Hey man. Maybe I didn't transfer it over. Let's see here. Oh, that's a... Oh, there we go. Nope. Here's a 1. Nope. This is the one. Let's see. Nope. All right, I must have forgotten to put it on there. Hold on, give me 1 second here. Just transfer it, because I know I put quotations on here. I just think I forgot to transfer it to my flash drive. Give me 1 second. Get this out of the way. Alrighty. Okay. Let me just check it to make sure that I have the right one. Any day now. Yeah, there we are. Yeah, I forgot to, okay, well, it's no big deal, just transfer it over. There we go. Thank you. Okay. Oops. There we go. Sorry about that. I had done it, but apparently not. Okay. Now let's see. I did that. Did that. All right, that's nope. I guess I didn't put it on. Okay, I'll read it to you then. All right. Well, still, I wanted this anyways. We're going to get to the councils in a minute. I talked about the Pancha Sila on Tuesday, and so I'll leave it on the Pancha Sila. I'll read the quotes to you. Luckily, I have them reproduced on my notes here. So this is from, well, the Udana. I'll write this down, which is part of the Buddhist sacred writings. And there are many of them, and they have many names. And this one's called the Udana. If you're curious, it's the Udana, Book 8, number 1. And what does the Buddha says? The Buddha says, there is, O bhikkhus, bhikkhu, which is the Pali word for bhikshu, there is, O bhikkhus, a state where there is neither earth nor water, nor heat nor air, neither infinity of space, nor infinity of consciousness, nor nothingness, nor perception, nor non-perception. Neither this world nor that world, both sun and moon. That, O bhikkhus, I term neither coming nor going, nor standing, neither death nor birth. It is without stability, without procession, without a basis. That thing is the end of sorrow. So here he's describing nirvana, okay? So it's even beyond nothingness in a way. There's not even nothingness. But even nirvana itself has no basis. But which is the end of sorrow, that you know that I guess you're not really going anywhere. Which to me doesn't actually make me feel very happy. It does make me feel sorrowful. So I'm not sure how the Buddha addresses that. But then again, I'm not a Buddhist. So for Buddhists, it's supposed to make you feel joyful, or at least have tranquility that you know where you're not going, okay, or that there's nothing to go. All right. Let's talk about the sacred writings of Buddhism. And to do that, well, I'll talk about these councils later because they do pertain to the sacred writings, but they pertain also to the community, which I'm going to talk about later, the divisions within the community. No, I might mention them as they relate to the scriptures, though. The Buddha's teachings were passed on orally by word of mouth. He was a preacher. He was not a writer. He went around northern India preaching his message. And his message was apparently memorized by his followers, who then themselves talked about it. So it wasn't, we don't have any early written, at least there was no writing down early on. So the Buddhist writings we do have of the teachings of the Buddha were written down much later, during the first century BC, is what we think. So the first century BC, and if you remember, if the Buddha lived like in the 600s or the 500s BC, that's several hundred years after this man lived that his teachings were finally apparently written down. Compare that with other religions, where, like we saw with Islam, where we have one of the earliest versions of the Quran, which dates to like just around the time of Muhammad's death. We have the writings about Jesus of Nazareth, which date to maybe 30, 40 years after the death of Jesus, after his ministry. So it's quite late in the case of the Buddha that they were written. The Buddhist scriptures were composed, and they seem to have been composed on the island of Sri Lanka, the country of Sri Lanka. Not, as you might expect, in India or Nepal. And I guess that has to do with the history of Buddhism, because Buddhism eventually, although it starts in India, it actually dies out in India eventually. And there are not very many Buddhists in India to this day, even though it started in India, or the region of India. Modern-day Nepal, yes. But here, Sri Lanka, this country of Sri Lanka, this big island nation, is where the Buddhist scriptures seem to have been written down. Mostly in the language of Pali. Almost immediately after the Buddha's death, however, there were arguments about the correct interpretation of his teaching. You know, what did he mean by this? What did he mean by that? So there started to be divisions about how to understand what the Buddha actually taught. And some of these issues, they tried to resolve them at these early Buddhist councils. And the first Buddhist council, which they say was held in the early 5th century BC, maybe it was, some of the stuff may be legendary, we're not sure if these councils actually happened at all, but anyways, these are traditional. The traditional date for this first council of Rajagriha is 486 BC. Or 86 BC. That's the traditional date. Whether it was held or not, we don't know. So early 5th century, also known as Rajgir. So, and these are all known by different names, so I give you the names. So Rajagriha is also known as Rajgir, Vaishali as Vesali, and Pataliputra is known as Patna. Just in case you come across these names and just know they're the same thing, but I'll go with the traditional name. So Rajagriha, that's for our purposes for the councils right now. That's the most important one because according to tradition, the traditional story, it was held a few months after the Buddha's death. And the purpose of this was to establish the teachings of the Buddha and at least part of the canon. So the monks would come together and, the monks would kind of repeat what they remembered of what they heard from the Buddha. And you see this in the Buddhist sacred writings, because a lot of times stories from the Buddha or sayings of the Buddha will start with the phrase, this is what I heard him say. and they'll give the story, or this is what the Buddha said, and it's someone remembering. So that's kind of like how they started out, like, well, this is what I heard the Buddha say, ba 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 ba, and then someone would be like, well, this is what I heard the Buddha say, ba 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 ba, and they would compare the stories, and they would try to, I guess, coalesce them, bring them together to establish the text and establish what they think the Buddha actually said. So this is what was going on at Rajagriha to some extent. But eventually we do have the development of sacred writings per se, sacred scriptures. And the group of sacred writings in Buddhism is called the Tipitaka, or in Sanskrit, it's called the Tripitaka. To reach there, got an R here. So in Sanskrit, it's the Tripitaka, and in Pali, which I'm going with the Pali here because it seems to be a more common designation, it's called the Tipitaka, which literally means 3 baskets. Triya in Sanskrit means 3, and a pitak is a basket, so you have 3 baskets. The 3 baskets. And there's, did I give a definition? So that's the name for the Buddhist scriptures. It can also be called the triple baskets if you want, but it's the same thing, And why is it called this? It's called this, the Tipitaka, because the teachings were originally written on palm leaves and then kept in 3 different baskets, according to the topic of the discussions and according to the length of the discourses. So it's kind of like the Tanakh, with Judaism. They had 3 sections. They had the Torah, the books that made, and they said, okay, is this a book of Torah? Yes, so it goes in the section of Torah. Is this a book of Torah? No, it's a prophet. Okay, so now we have a new section called the prophets. All right, put all the prophets there. Then we have another book. Well, is this a Torah? Is this the prophet? No, it's something else. It's like a book of poetry or something like that. All right, well, let's throw this in the writings. Remember that with the Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim? Same thing is going on here. It's like, this is a long discourse. It's talking about monastic rules, the rules for the monks and the nuns. No, we'll throw it in that basket. This is a discourse talking about the Dharma. It's more speculative. Okay, we'll throw it in that basket. Oh, this is something talking about a previous life of the Buddha and giving details about what he did. And blah, blah, blah. Oh, we'll put it in that basket. And you ended up with 3 different baskets. Pataka, okay? They were written, as I've already said, in the language of Pali, which is related to Sanskrit. So the Tipitaka is also called the Pali Canon, based on its name. It's all written in Pali. And we know what a canon is, I believe, already. Maybe we don't, but a canon is a yardstick that is used for a standard, any standard, usually with writings. It's used a lot in religion, but, people always, if you're a fan of a show, I don't know if anyone ever watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer back in the 90s. Well, you guys weren't alive then, but it's in reruns. You can watch it now. I sometimes watch it. Yeah. Anyways, I was in love with Sarah Michelle Gellar for a period of time. Anyway. Buffy. But, there's the Buffy verse, or if you're a Star Trek fan or a Star Wars fan, there's those universes as well, or comic books and superheroes. And there's a canon. They use that kind of language as well in television shows and movies and stuff. There's a canon. There might be, the TV shows, which you talk about the different events in the TV show, but there might also be books and stuff based on the TV show that are part of the canon that extend the stories and stuff like that. So it's used in other non-religious ways. So the Pali Canon, the canon written in the Pali language. God bless you. So this collection forms the essential basic body of teaching for all Buddhists. And to this collection, Buddhist traditions have added a multitude of other different writings. Okay, so there are all sorts of Tibetan Buddhist writings. There are writings from Zen Buddhism. All sorts of different forms of Buddhism have been added to this. But see, the Tipitaka seems to be the essential core that all Buddhists agree on and will accept. And there are, as I said, 3 parts to it, 3 baskets: the Vinaya, the Sutta, and the Abhidhamma. These are all in Pali as well. The basket of the community or the order, the Vinaya, casket. Freudian slip there. No, thinking a lot about death, I guess. The basket of discourses, sutras. We know sutras from Hinduism. Sutras are kind of commentaries on things, so maybe discourses and things. And the Abhidhamma, Dharma, so the extension of the Dharma, the basket of the, what is it? There you go, Mr. Dunn. The higher Dharma, excuse me. And what are each of these? The first one, the Vinaya Pitaka, the basket of order, deals with rules of governance for the Sangha, for the monks, for the community, the monks and the nuns. So when you came in here and you were listening, maybe, or you heard at least, that guy chanting from the Patimokkha, which I told you were the community rules that they would chant on that celebration day, that holiday, that would be found in the Vinaya Pitaka, and it is. Okay, so that's where they're getting that from. It contains the rules of governance. There is some historical material in the Vinaya about the life of the Buddha and the early councils, but, a lot of it's focused on rules of discipline for the bhikshus and the bhikshunis, the women. The Sutta Pitaka, the basket of discourses, could also call it the basket of guidelines or instructions, is another way you could describe it, is a collection, as you might imagine, of discourses and teachings by the Buddha. It also contains a huge collection of 547 stories about the previous lives of the Buddha, so with many previous iterations before he came into our age as the Buddha. And then the Abhidhamma Buddha, the basket of the higher Dharma, is more philosophical and speculative. It contains philosophical and psychological speculation about the meaning of the Dharma, the Buddha's teaching. And it's composed of 7 books that's kind of written in a dry academic style, intended really for specialists in Buddhist ideas. It's not intended for the common person. Here is an example, a picture of part of the Pali Canon. And you can see how they wrote books in that culture. Okay, it was somewhat different from how we do it in the West. You had strips of material, and these strips are tied together at the top, and you flip them like this. That's how you read a book in a lot of the Eastern cultures. Okay, it's not opened like this, it's opened like this. Okay. And you see there are pictures here. I think these are stupas, which are pictures of Buddhist shrines. Here we have the Buddha in parinirvana. He's going to sleep and dying and entering into total nirvana, okay, after teaching his message. And here you can see the text of something, because I don't read Pali, and it's grainy pictures, so I don't know. And I give you some quotations, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. This is from the Vinaya Pitaka, from the disciplinary code for bhikshus, the Patimokkha. This is in the section Paraji Kudaso, the cases for what would disqualify you as a monk. And then we have another example from punishment, kind of punishment you can get, forfeiting and penances you might have to do. Does anyone want to read either of these? Interested in reading from the Buddhist scriptures, a selection? Go ahead, Ms. Undercuffler.
If any bhikkhu has entered upon a training and livelihood for bhikkhu, am I saying that right?
Bhikkhu is fine, yes.
Not having rejected the training, not having disclosed his incapability, should engage in the act of sexual intercourse, even with just a female animal, he is disqualified, not incapable.
He is disqualified. What do you think that means? Disqualified from communion.
Not able to be monk.
Yeah, he's thrown out, So, yeah, did you have a question? Okay. Yeah, he's thrown out of the community. So this is like an unforgivable sin. So you're not supposed to have any sexual activity as a monk. You're supposed to remain a celibate. So they say. But, as we might learn maybe, but there are some forms of Buddhism, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, where they practice Tantra, which is a form of sexual yoga, and sexual practices are integrated into. They might actually be some of the monks might actually be having sex, but approved sex, okay? It's approved somewhat. They don't talk a lot about it. It's kind of secretive. But anyways, just be aware of that in case I don't know, if you go to a Tibetan monastery and the monk's like, hey, want me to show you some Tantra? And it's like, yeah, sign a waiver first. Yeah. Anyways, but you're not generally supposed to have sexual intercourse. And even if you just do it with a female animal, I don't know why it matters what the sex of the animal is. Like, but, sure, the animal doesn't, the animal is like, but anyways, so even if you have it with an animal, that's also not kosher. That's not a good thing to do. Certainly not with another human being, but don't do it with an animal either. So if you use the sexual faculty or the sexual ability or misuse it in their view, then you are out of the community. Okay? Who would like to read this other longer one from another section of the Patimokkha? I know. Nobody? I'll do it. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Ms. Owens. Thank you.
Now, if an unrelated male householder or female householder should have a robe cloth woven for a bhikkhu by cloth weavers, and then if that bhikkhu, uninvited beforehand, having approached the cloth weavers, should make a suggestion about the robe cloth, saying, friends, this robe cloth, which is being woven for me, make it long, wide, thick, well woven, well diffused, well scraped, and well done. Certainly we will also then present a little something to the sir, and if that bhikkhu, having said so, should present a little something, even just a little alms food, this is a case involving expiation with
forfeiture. Okay. So, I mean, what's going on here? I mean, because the monk, as you saw from the picture before that I showed you of the monk chanting with the other monks, that they wear specific, garb, identifying garb or clothing. And they actually, it's very standardized. I mean, there are different layers of clothing that they have to wear once they're admitted into the monastery, which is kind of interesting. Which could be a problem, because it could also lead to desire and craving. You want nice, frilly clothes or soft clothes and stuff like that. So they have a rule for that. This is the case of a monk who's like, hey, if you're going to make my robe for me, you can make it this way, nice and comfortable and whatever, and make it wide, full, so it's comfortable to wear. And if you do that, I'll give you a little something. I'll give you a little present and stuff. And if the monk does that, then he's not thrown out of the community. He's just forfeiture and expiation. So maybe he loses the forfeiture. He forfeits the robe. Maybe they take it away from him, give him an old ratty one. Say, here, the one with all stains on it. You use that. And expiation just means a penance. So he might have to do some penance. So maybe he has to scrub floors in the kitchen for the next week because of this, because he he showed desire or craving, I guess, and that's a violation of. So there are hundreds of these rules. Actually, there are a number more for the women. I don't know what it is about women and religion, but the men always want to keep them under control. So there are 200 some rules for the men and 300 some rules for the women. With just going over these different eventualities that might occur in the community, what you have to do. It's not so simple, trying to gain enlightenment, and there's still a lot of rules for it, a lot of ways to do things, or ways that you have to do things in the community. I guess so you don't disturb other people in their search for enlightenment. You want some orderliness in the community. So I thought these were some interesting quotes from this, which you can find online, as I did. Oh. That's interesting. Maybe. We'll see. Well, what time is it? It's 1:36. Do I want to go into the song, huh? Who said that? Ms. Pennick? God bless you, woman. I appreciate the honesty. Ms. Purnell, all right. Yeah. So I might finish this up, but All right, yeah, because it's 1:30. It's 1:36. So I guess I'll end here and start talking about the Sangha on Tuesday. God bless you all. Have a good weekend. Let's put Melinda. That's
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day, Miss. Thank you. Have a good day, sir. Thank you. Where's the Melinda phone? Oh, there it is. Karma. Yeah, I knew I had a quote about karma. There it is. Okay. Have a good weekend. Thank you. Have a good day, Miss. Did Miss Reaser come back? Have a good day, sir.
Thank you.
Have a good day, Miss. Thank you.
Have a good weekend, Professor.
Have a good day, sir. Thank you. Alrighty. Hmm.